Welcome back to Coffee with Stan. We've had such an extraordinary day of conversations already. What a conversation with Representative Andy Kim, hopefully soon to be our newest senator. Representative Angie Craig, as well from Minnesota, just such a deep and thoughtful approach to the work she's doing. We're about to speak with Representative Susan Wild from Pennsylvania, and then we will speak with David Hogg from Leaders We Deserve and March for Our Lives. So we are going to bring up Susan. Susan is in Pennsylvania in her car. I'm surprised, Susan, that you're not actually jogging with cameras all around you and people asking you questions while you jog with everything we're seeing and hearing out of Pennsylvania. So thank you so much for joining us in between campaign stops. We're thrilled to have a great conversation with you. Let me introduce the Congresswoman because she has been doing and has asked for this reelection moment to do a lot of really serious work. And I want to dive right in. You know, Congresswoman, the conversations that we've had have been so specific to the people who each of these representatives and soon-to-be senators are working for every single day. And Susan Wild is the Democratic U.S. Representative for Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District and served in Congress for that district since 2019, and before that, the 15th District from 2018 to 2019. She grew up in an Air Force family moving across the United States for the majority of her childhood, and she says Lehigh Valley is the only place she's ever called home since she moved here and started her family over 30 years ago. So I'm thrilled to welcome you to Coffee with Stan and to let our viewers get to know you a little bit better. How you holding up there, you and your steering wheel?
Thank you, Stan. Sorry about the steering wheel. I just want to assure everybody that's listening or watching that I am parked, so I'm not moving in my vehicle, but such is the life of somebody who is less than 2 weeks out from Election Day in a very competitive district, but at the same time doing my official side work. That's actually what I've been doing today, is going from official stop to official stop, not even campaign yet.
Oh, not even between campaign stops. You're actually doing your job, and now you're campaigning for a minute with us. Okay.
Exactly. Right.
I wouldn't be surprised, Congresswoman, if many of the people that will listen are also in their cars driving home later today, so they won't know the difference, and that's fine too. You know, I wanted to start right at the top because you have been so involved in education. And education, to me, has always been one of the things that my grandmother taught me, right? If you're educated, you can make good decisions. And your focus on education, I thought, is very, very strong. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about it. I know that you've sponsored a bipartisan bill, the Schools Preventing Hunger in At-Risk Kids Act. And we've talked about that with a couple of our other guests. Can you tell us in particular about this act that you co-sponsored? I think this ability to have nutrition in schools is so critical. Can you give us a little bit of color from the work you've done on that?
I'd be happy to, and thank you for the question. I've been on the Education Committee since I got to Congress and have seen a lot. And I will tell you that I am a staunch believer that a quality public education is one of the greatest things that we can provide in this country. And just by way of perspective, I want people to think about the fact that there are countries where some people, particularly women, aren't even allowed to be educated. And the one thing they want more than anything is to get an education. And so I don't think we value it nearly enough. And I will tell you that this issue of hungry children came to my attention really long ago, before I ever came to Congress. I went to public schools my whole life. My two children were brought up in K-12 public schools. And, you know, I never really thought about the issue of hunger in the classroom until I was volunteering at my kids' school in elementary school. And I actually one day was volunteering in the cafeteria and realized that there was, at that point, there was a separate line for the kids who were getting reduced or free lunches. So, and it hit me right away then that these kids were being ostracized, or that they had the potential to be ostracized because they had to go in the line that made it clear their families couldn't afford to pay for the school lunch. And that just really troubled me. And then from that point on, I started really thinking about how vital having food in their stomach is for our students. I mean, all of us know that when your stomach is gnawing at you and you're hungry, it's all you can think about sometimes. And, most of us probably aren't even very familiar with that feeling anymore because we have the good fortune of being well fed. But, the idea, and it also provides energy. So, the idea of children having to go to school without proper nourishment, not only does it impede their ability to learn, but it also impedes their ability to even stay awake for classes. And so I just think, I don't know why the idea of free school lunches, and by the way, more than one of my school districts provides free breakfast and lunch, hot breakfast and lunch, and they don't even have people apply for the program because the vast majority of the families in that school district qualify for it, and it would become more of an administrative headache than it's worth. And that, I think, tells us the scope of this problem. And so, it was from that moment in a school cafeteria so many years ago that fast forward to now, really thinking a lot about the issues of hunger in this country. Nobody in this country should be hungry. I mean, there's just no excuse for it. But particularly our children, we've got to make sure that they're nourished. And the cost of providing free school breakfast and lunches is so nominal compared to so many other things that we spend money on.
I'm so interested, Congresswoman Wild, in your take on that separation. I had a free school lunch card when I was in like second and third grade, son of a single mom. But they didn't put us in a separate line. I was already embarrassed, to be honest, to even take out my little free lunch card. But to be put in a separate line, I think what you observed there, really interesting. And I've never had anyone actually mention that, so I didn't.
They don't do it anymore, but they did then,
good.
And it really upset me.
Well,
it
good.
Really upset me.
Good. The other thing that you brought up there was, that there are schools that are just providing the food because so many within the school would need it anyway. And I think one of the things that I know you've been working on is, but there are marginal young people in places where you don't have to look starving to be hungry and to be suffering. And I think that the work you've been doing, in particular on that act, helps to make sure that there are not sort of these hidden hungers, right? These quiet sufferings. So thank you so much for your work on that. Can I ask you a little bit of a follow-up? You mentioned your children in public school, K through 12. And I know it was everyone's hope during the Build Back Better bill that the provisions for federally mandated and funded preschool and 2 years of community college would have made it through. And I remember being back in Washington in 2022, really pushing for that right before they stripped it from the Build Back Better bill. Do you, as an insider, can you bring us behind the scenes? Is there more energy around you for pre-K? That K through 12, that kindergarten guarantee, that started in the 70s, right? Before that, it had to be locally available, not federally mandated and funded. Is there more energy? Are we getting closer to federal pre-K, do you think?
Well, it'll never be federal pre-K, and I'm only because it will always be something administered through states, but it will require federal resources to do it. And we know that some states already have universal pre-K.
Yes.
And that generally means that kids are starting their education at about age 3. And I have to tell you, as somebody who I've worked my entire adult life, and my children went to preschool that we paid for, and then when they were ready for kindergarten, the schools around us didn't have full day kindergarten yet, only half day. They do now all have full day, thank goodness. And so we ended up having to pay to send our children to full day kindergarten because of our work schedules. But it was probably the best thing we ever did for our kids, because when they got to first grade, what we heard, and there was this whole group of kids who went from this full day kindergarten program to the same public school, and the teacher that welcomed them in made a point of letting us know that they were so far ahead of the rest of the kids who were entering first grade who had not had the benefit of that. And so I don't think people realize how much of a person's knowledge base and their intelligence can be formed at these very early ages. Pre-K is just as vital, if not more vital, than full day kindergarten. And the answer to your question, I'm happy to say, is that there is great movement towards universal pre-K, assuming that Democrats take back the House majority. There is a bicameral bill, meaning House and Senate bill, called the Child Care for Working Families Act. I actually have trended away from using the term daycare or child care, because I think early childhood education is really how we should be characterizing it. But the Child Care for Working Families Act includes provisions that would incorporate universal pre-K, and I think it would be a game changer for the kids, obviously, and their futures. But it would also be a huge game changer for working families. The cost of childcare these days is, if it's a child that has to go to full day childcare because they're not yet school age, parents are telling me that their childcare costs as much as their rent or mortgage. If they are a couple that happens to have student loans, then they've got that third, piece. And those are probably their three most expensive items in their family budget. Imagine if at age 3, children were going to a safe, secure, well-equipped preschool, and it was becoming part of that public education system. It not only would benefit our children and by the way, I think it benefits our country as a whole when we are investing in education. I hope that's clear from my comments. But it also helps people who want to work. And by the way, all of these employers who have been saying to me since before COVID, we need more people in the workforce. So all the way around, it would be a win-win, I think, in this country. You asked me about community colleges, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to address that for a second.
Please.
We have 2 outstanding community colleges in my district. 2 of the 14 in Pennsylvania are in my district. And I will tell you, I didn't know that much about community colleges until I became a member of Congress, and then started visiting these schools and really learning about them. And I wish I had known more. When my kids were in high school and kids were in my house every minute of the day, I wish I had known more about the community colleges to steer a lot of their classmates. In fact, probably one of my children should have been steered towards community college, at least initially. It's such a great opportunity for people who aren't quite sure what they want to be when they grow up, so to speak, but know that they know they want a higher education. And we know that every year of higher education that you have increases your lifetime earning potential significantly. And so we've really got to support our community colleges. And our 2 community colleges tend to be, they're very responsive to our local employers. When our local utility company needed more linemen or line people, they incorporated a program to train people to do this line work. And it was very fast. You can't do that at a 4-year school.
Right.
And it was really quite amazing for me to learn about. And I want to see us really support our community colleges.
Well, thank you. When we do take back the House, I hope that this will all come back from that Build Back Better bill, and that we work on both that pre-K early childhood education, did I get it right?
Yes.
And then the community college. You started to touch on the workforce itself, so that'll lead me to my next question, because Not only are you in a car in between all of the work that you're doing for your district, but you're nonstop writing and co-writing and co-sponsoring bills. And one of the co-sponsored acts was the Raise the Wage Act. And I wanted to take a moment with you to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, it's interesting. When I first started running in 2018, we were all running on a platform of increasing the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Here I sit in Pennsylvania, where our minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour, which is what the federal minimum wage is. And you don't have to do the math to realize that that does not support a person, even working 50 hours a week. So we really do need to make sure that people are being paid fairly, being paid living wages, and that they are given the opportunity to get raises and promotions and that kind of thing. Let me just say this about minimum wage. In my district, and I'm only speaking for Pennsylvania 7 because I'm not an authority on other areas. While we were talking about $15 an hour as a minimum wage in 2018, that conversation would almost be ludicrous now. It's great as perhaps as a minimum wage for some sectors, but the vast majority of people who are working in my district are making more than that now. Why? Because a number of industries moved in and there's a competition for workers. And as a result, wages have gone up. Now, some of that happened because of warehouses coming into the district. Amazon came in, and I'll never forget, they were paying $20 an hour right from the get-go. And local employers were very upset because they were very worried about losing employees to the Amazon warehouse. And to some extent that's happened, but what has happened mostly is that we have seen wages go up overall. So we have lots and lots of manufacturing facilities here, lots and lots of healthcare facilities here. So those people are doing well. They're making a real solid income. The problem is that if you're not in one of those two industries, if you're in fast food, if you're waiting tables, if you are working in sanitation, chances are you are still very much a victim of whatever the minimum wage might be. So I don't know a lot of people making $7.25 an hour, thank goodness.
Yes.
That multiplied out over the course of a year puts you way below the federal poverty level, and you could be working full time and be way below the federal poverty level, and that to me is just outrageous.
If you'll allow me, I want to jump over to healthcare. I think one of the ways that many Americans may have known you is you were so brave to take the House floor and talk about how suicide has impacted you and your family, and by not going silent, by speaking that out. I know you know, but I will remind you anyway in this conversation how many thousands and millions of people that helped. That ability to not suffer in silence when there is a mental health issue around you or an addiction issue. And you took that and you've continued to work on the Dr. Lorna Breen Healthcare Provider Protection Act and the Enhancing Mental Health and Suicide Prevention through Campus Planning Act. I thought I would bring both of those up and ask you to comment on one or both in terms of your work on those and how they are affecting people.
Well, the one thing we know for sure is that mental health issues affect every corner of our country. It is not a partisan thing. It's not even an economic issue. It's not a demographic issue. We know there are some sectors where suicide in particular is more prevalent. Farmers, which a lot of people don't know, have a very high rate of suicide. But in general, mental health issues short of suicide affect every sector. And so, when in 2019, my partner died in May of 2019, 5 months into my term in Congress, and died by suicide. I learned very quickly that he was in a demographic of people who were the fastest growing segment of society to have suicide as an issue. And it was white men over the age of 60. And, that just kind of blew my mind because I don't think any of us really ever would think of that as, and that was back in 2019. Right now, my biggest concern is that the fastest growing segment that seems to be affected by suicide are children and adolescents. And that's a huge, huge concern that we have to address. So I did speak out on the House floor about a month after my partner died. It was partly done as therapy for me. It wasn't as some people retreat and, want to be quiet. I guess I gave the eulogy at both of my parents' funerals. I find comfort in speaking and talking. And so in part it was that. And it was also intended to be just discussion to tell my colleagues what was going on in my life, so that if I seemed like I wasn't quite all there, they would understand why. And what I didn't really expect it to be the kind of thing that was going to become this national conversation based on my speech, and it did. Within hours, my speech had gone viral on Twitter. I was getting phone calls. My office was getting phone calls from around the country from people who were so happy that I had brought it out of the shadows. Since that time, I think it may be the single most momentous thing I've done in Congress, because I hear from people over and over and over again who feel safe to come talk to me about something in their family, their children, their spouses, whatever. And just being able to reduce that stigma and have people talk about it is so important. So the Lorna Breen Act came about because I was approached by one of these families. Lorna Breen was an emergency room physician, director of an emergency room in New York City at the peak of COVID, when on the national news, we were seeing refrigerated trucks being pulled up in front of hospitals and used as morgues. That's how many people were dying. And I know you have to think about it, but if you think back, you'll remember that.
Yes.
And so Lorna was working nonstop and was terribly, terribly stressed out. And healthcare was a very stressful profession to be in at that point in time. And she went for one weekend and saw her sister and told her sister that she was really struggling. And her sister tried to get her to get some mental health care. And Lorna's response was, I can't. I might lose my staff privileges. I would lose my ability to practice medicine if they knew that I was seeking mental health care. And unfortunately, very soon thereafter, Lorna died by suicide. Her family came to me. We crafted the Lorna Breen Act, which provides for increased mental health awareness, training, and resources in every healthcare facility, and not just for doctors, for everybody up and down the food chain. And it's been reauthorized. It was fully authorized. By the way, it went through on a very bipartisan basis. I don't know if it was unanimous or not. Then it went to the Senate, passed very quickly, was signed into law by President Biden in almost record time, which was amazing. And then it's since been reauthorized. So it's a really important bill.
Congratulations on bringing that up. I'm getting given a 1-minute signal, and I can't help but, first of all, thank you for that. But I wanted to ask you one question, if you can give me a 15-second answer. I understand that your dad was, I might get it wrong. Your dad was ultra conservative and your mom was ultra liberal. So you grew up in the country we are all living in your home, right? You grew up with two opinions.
I grew up in a very bipartisan household, but it was not a household that's reflective of where we are now, because as I often tell people, my parents were able to coexist amicably. Well, they fought about things, but not about politics. It was amazing. And yes, my father was very conservative. He was a Republican. My mother was a very liberal Democrat.
How did they do it? What's the 10-second advice? What was it?
They recognized that they had other priorities, like their children and raising a family and making sure that they were, we moved every 2 years because of my father's Air Force service, making sure that, those moves went well. There were bigger priorities to that.
That's right.
So
that's right. That's the advice.
That's what it really is all about.
That's the advice. Well, Congresswoman Susan Wild, thank you so much for coming to us in between the work that you're doing. I am honored to have had the chat with you and to have really gotten into the details of the work that you're doing. I hope that everyone that listens now or later to this interview or sees you in your car, sees how hard you're working, will click through and make a donation to your campaign. This is a critical moment in our history. If they can't, maybe they come and volunteer for a day. I'm sure your website will give them some options there, or at the very least to share what I think is an amazing and extremely optimistic and solid conversation. So from me to you, thank you so much, Congresswoman Susan
Thank
Wild.
you.
We are going to have just a couple of minute break, and then we're going to be meeting an extraordinary young man, David Hogg, who has turned an unbelievable crisis into an unbelievable movement. So thank you to the Congresswoman, and we'll see David in just a moment.